listening to The Business Breakfast on Dubai Eye 103.8.
Join the conversation.
Right, let's get into it with all things real estate and all things Cavendish Maxwell. Now, just before we go on, just to pick up on what we were saying a little bit earlier on, people saying, oh, come on, you lot, you talk about real estate and property all the time. Cavendish Maxwell is one of the leading Middle East real estate advisory group and property consultancies, okay? So they're not here to sell you any properties or anything like that, but they are here to give you an indication of what is going on in the markets, not just here in Dubai, but across the region. And that's why we've got Zacky in to explain some of the latest numbers. Why? Because Dubai's residential real estate market allegedly recording more than 57,300 sales between January and April 2026. With off-plan transactions rising 3.3% year on year to, keep opportunistic investors remaining active and alive and very much interested at the moment. Zacky's been kind enough to join us live in studio. Zacky's the Director of Business Development and Client Relations at Cavendish Maxwell. Zacky, good to see you as always.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Okay, these numbers. 57,300 sales, 4 months, April higher than March. How do you read them?
Well, look, obviously, if we look at how the year started, I think we've touched on this before, record months in January and February, a cool off in March, understandably, given the situation. When we look at April, slight improvement, month on month. If we look at it year on year, however, it is down 20%, April versus April 2025. Now, there is a caveat with that, and the main caveat being that last year, 2025, saw a record number of launches. So, I think one stat is approximately every 13 hours there was a launch in 2025. We've obviously, that pace of launches has slowed in the last 2 months. We're not seeing that sort of volume of launches, and all the transactions historically float between 70 and 80% off plan. And if we look at it, it's usually initial sales from developers in the last sort of 12 to 18 months are the majority of the sales. So, yeah, down, but probably as a result of what I've just highlighted.
Off plan, up 3.3% year on year, but turnkey down 39% in April. Again, what's the explanation there?
Well, I think if you're in a ready property right now, you're not going to be in a hurry to sell.
Yeah.
I think let's call it as we see it. You're going to sort of take the wait and see approach. I think what we've got to also look at is the resilience that's built into the market. When we look at the market and the volume of transactions, etc., a lot of the purchasers are cash buyers. When we look at this data, we can tell you, month on month, quarter on quarter, year on year, in terms of the number of mortgages, and we can look at the volume of transactions. What we don't know is, in the level of detail, it's very, very difficult to clearly differentiate what is a remortgage and what is a new mortgage. So, let's just assume that it's roughly 1 in 4 versus 1 in 5 are a mortgage property or a mortgage transaction. You're showing sort of nearly 80%, of the transactions are cash transactions potentially. So, yeah, it's.
No, sorry to interrupt, but I'll just pick you up on that because one of the figures that jumped off the page for me: 74% of all sales are off plan. I mean, you and I have spoken before, March of this year about the supply and demand out there, etc. I mean, is that what's driving that dominance right now, or not?
Yeah, look, I think essentially off plan is still there, and that's somewhat caveated in the sense that if you or I were to buy an off-plan unit, it can take 60 to 90 days for that sale to register. So the reality is we're seeing, healthy numbers in the data. However, it's a bit too early to really analyse. At the end of Q2, once we've had a full quarter's worth of data, then we'll be able to sort of assess what the effect truly is.
I think you've preempted my next question, which is, because as you say, listen, it's all good and well reading into the numbers, but as we said, March was a little bit anomaly. Even if you're doing a deal, you've got to factor in a couple of weeks. So when do we get the real picture?
I'd say, look, with anything like this, even if we look back to, say, the global financial crisis, it took six months really for Dubai to really sort of feel the impact of that financial crisis. It was probably into 2009 when we felt it. And so I think anything like this takes a bit of time, because you're talking about an illiquid asset class in real estate. However, there is a lot of resilience built in, as I was saying before, and a lot of it really depends in this situation on what happens in the next few weeks.
These numbers suggest that people are buying at the moment. So who's buying, and what kind of deals are they actually getting?
Look, at the moment, it's still, the volume is apartments overwhelmingly. Upwards of 80% of the transactions are still apartments. When we look at it, it's still, I would say, majority investor-led. Because that's the assumption with it being off-plan. But then obviously it's also because of the sort of the flexibility that developers can offer in terms of payment plans and incentives that they're offering, which makes it attractive. When you're looking at loan to value, if you're on a ready property and looking at a ready transaction, generally you need 20% of the deposit. So that can be quite challenging if a developer's offering a product which you can split over a period of time, say 2-3 years, but then also now many of the banks are increasingly offer under construction mortgages, which is quite a good product. So that tends to leave buyers thinking, well, okay, I only actually need to sort of put down the initial deposit, whatever the developer's offering on that incentive, then I can do my payment plan, which is flexible, and once I've paid down 50%, I can mortgage the rest.
Just lastly, and we always appreciate your opinions, your candid opinions from you and the house view of Cavendish Maxwell. As I said, you put together data from across the industry. It's not just one brokerage or one developer, etc. So you look at it from afar. Bounce back ability, yeah, we've heard this one again. Building stronger for the future, building back stronger, etc. Taking all those into account, etc., and the numbers that you are being fed, honest view on Q2?
Look, I think we're probably going to see, well, a lot of that is directly linked to what happens in the next few weeks on the geopolitical front. But, what we're sort of seeing so far is, a healthy number of transactions in terms of month on month from March to April, slight increase. Now, year on year, down slightly. That trend is likely to continue unless we have a very quick resolution to what's happening. When we look at it from a market perspective, Dubai still on a rate per square foot is very attractive globally. Yeah. So I think that bounce back ability is still very much there. And when we look at it, interestingly, on the rental front and the ultra luxury segment, which shows, because this is directly linked to sort of serious FDI, we've seen a number of record rental contracts signed in April. 2 of them in the top 5. So 57 million dirham rental contract over 3 years that was signed in April, and a 25 million dirham rental contract over 3 years signed in April. So on a rental contract at that level, multi-year deal, admittedly, but it's still value on those. That is quite positive if people of that caliber are willing to sign those kind of rental deals. That tells you that they're sort of just, they want to be here, but they just want to sort of pause on necessarily on the transactions. That being said, we've also seen a $100 million transaction. So
who knows?
Yeah, exactly.
One thing we do know is we'll get you back in to talk about Q2 numbers as soon as they come out, when we know a little better. Zacky, really appreciate it. Thanks for your reading of the market there. All these numbers, of course, available from Cavendish Maxwell. Zacky is the Director of Business Development and Client Relations.
Thank you for having me.